Once upon a deeply awful time, in a land full of fleas, filth, and feudalism, there lived a guy dressed like a giant who would knock on your door and say, "Hey, heard you were dying. Mind if I poke your boils?" Yes, dear listener. Tonight we talk about the plague doctor, part physician, part medieval ghoul, part walking hazmat meme. Oh boy, was it just the absolute worst job in history. Next to maybe being the poor soul who had to clean chamber pots for King Henry VIII. So fluff your pillow, dim the candlelight, and let's drift back in time to the lovely years of 1347 to roughly forever, when Europe decided it was a great idea to pile up garbage in the streets and cough directly into each other's mouths. Okay, quick vibe check. Imagine you're walking through 14th century Paris. You know how today's cities have garbage trucks and sewers? Yeah, they didn't. People just threw their waste out the windows. Human waste, rotten meat, dead animals. It all just marinated in the cobblestones. And this dear sleeper is where your friendly plague doctor had to walk every day, in his thick wool robe, wooden shoes, and the smell of a medieval fart hurricane. If you're already feeling nauseous, good, we're just getting started. You've seen the mask, right? That long, creepy bird beak. It wasn't just for style. That was medicine, baby. See, people back then believed that the plague was caused by bad air, what they called miasma. So plague doctors stuffed their beak mask with herbs, spices, and sometimes literal poop, hoping it would cleanse the air they breathed. It was like DIY aromatherapy, except you're surrounded by death, and your essential oil diffuser is also your gas mask. Lavender, rosemary, rotten goose fat, just vibes. Plague doctors weren't really doctors. Most of them had little to no medical training. They were just dudes in bird cosplay who got paid to count corpses, pop buboes, and write down how many people died today. Fun. Their tools included a wooden stick for poking patients from a safe distance, and sometimes a clipboard for notes. Although, let's be real, most of the notes just said dead over and over. Think of them as the worst kind of public health official, one who couldn't cure anything, smelled like vinegar, and probably made your situation worse. So where did plague doctors sleep? Great question. Bad answer. They often lived inside the towns they worked in, surrounded by plague. Their homes were close to hospitals, which were less like hospitals and more like unventilated buildings full of screaming people dying on straw beds. And you think your upstairs neighbors are loud. Some doctors slept in full gear to avoid exposure. Imagine napping in a leather suit filled with herbs, listening to rats chew on floorboards. Confide. Food options for a plague doctor weren't great. First, most towns were in a state of panic, so bread and meat were scarce. Second, no one wanted to be near the plague guy, so restaurants, if you could call them that, often refused to serve them. So they'd eat whatever they could get: moldy cheese, stale bread, questionable broth. Imagine your worst road trip gas station meal, but every day for 5 years. Also, drinking water, not safe. You'd probably just drink beer all day, which honestly might be the only perk of the job. Despite being called to help, plague doctors were deeply unpopular. People were terrified of them. Not just because of the death thing, but because seeing a plague doctor meant someone in your house was about to die. So when you showed up to work, people ran, or threw things, or screamed. Which, isn't great for morale when you're already surrounded by puss and rats. Also, you couldn't date. No one was swiping right on the guy who smelled like vinegar and carried a dead baby in a cart. Let's walk through a plague doctor's typical Tuesday. You wake up in your flea-infested cot. You strap on 30 pounds of gear that smells like onions and horse piss. You grab your stick. You walk into a room with 7 dying people. You poke some boils. Write "he dead" in your notebook. Try not to vomit. Someone screams. You step in something wet and pray it's soup. Repeat. No breaks, no modern gloves, no antibiotics, just a prayer, a stick, and the crushing weight of Europe's disease-ridden despair. Remember those cute little plague vectors? Yeah, they were everywhere. Rats lived in homes, on ships, and marketplaces, probably in your hat if you weren't careful. And the worst part, people didn't know rats were the problem. They blamed the air, the Jews, cats, and God, but not the rats, which meant rats thrived. So imagine doing house calls as a plague doctor while tripping over rats and knowing none of your treatments work. It's like being a firefighter who's also the arsonist's roommate.